Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Modern Fairy Sightings podcast. And this time I am absolutely delighted to welcome my friend, Druid Adrian Rook. Welcome, Adrian.
Hi, Joe. Nice to be here.
It is lovely. It feels a bit funny talking to you on we're on Skype tonight because interestingly we've had quite a number of technical issues, which I'll be honest with you, we're talking tonight about your encounter with Gwyn ap Nudd, and it's not the first time that I've experienced technical difficulties when we're talking around the subject. So I'm just putting it out there.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
No, and I think, we just had a small kind of check-in before to sense in whether it's kind of right to talk about it, and you're feeling good about it, I'm feeling good about it, so we're here. But Son of the White Mist, I think there's some kind of connotations with technical mist type issues going on, but anyway, it's so good to have you here, and you are a very dear friend of mine. And I will just also mention that it's about 10 years. Well, it is 10 years since we met in June. Yeah. And we met at Stanton Drew at summer solstice, 2014, just before I moved to Bristol. So you are a druid with Obod.
That's the
Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. And it would be great if you could start off by kind of telling people about, what it means to be a druid, and something a little bit about Obod and your spiritual journey, kind of how you found Obod. That would be great to hear.
Yeah, a little bit about Obod. Obod, when I joined Obod, which would be some 31 years ago, coming up this year, I believe there were around 200 members of the whole order. And so you corresponded directly with Philip Cargon, the chosen chief. And there was about 3 tutors, I think, altogether. And Philip was one of them. I think now the order, I know now the order's got some 30,000 plus people that have either joined Obod through working the Druid course that they provide, the Bardic course, the Ovate course, and the Druid course, and are still practicing as Druids and are in touch and are using their Druid teachings in their local communities to try and make a difference. My journey into Druidry was quite magical, and I'll just start by saying that Carl Jung said, inside of every human being is a desire to connect with God, or the gods as we understand them. And that was certainly something for me. I was a scared child, felt quite often I didn't really belong on the planet, and it sounds quite strange, and my mum was horrified when I told her. But I used to have dreams where a spaceship landed in the back garden, and I was only about 5 then. A spaceship landed in the back garden, and a little ladder came down, and these people popped out and said, "Come on, Aid, we're ever so sorry we dropped you on the wrong planet." Which is quite not very nice to my parents, because in my dream I used to run up the steps and my mum and dad were there saying, "Come back, come back." And I'd be like, "No, sorry guys, wrong planet." And it's a funny one, because there was something for me quite fearful about being a child, and there was no real reason. My parents were loving and kind, and so anyway, life travels on. I do believe what Rudolf Steiner said: we don't fully incarnate from the spirit world until we're 7 years of age. So I think that was certainly the case for me. It was then around 7 that my my nightmares stopped, my dreams stopped. But I used to have visitors in my bedroom, and people would sit on my bed, and very connected to the spirit world. They didn't harm me or threaten to harm me. They were just there. And of course, we live in a society that tells you that that's not happening. My parents said, "Oh, it's all a figment of your imagination," and they thought I was a bit hyper and slightly odd. But when I got to about 7, I calmed down a little bit, and life went on. Although I always had this spiritual longing, a longing for a connection with a creative force, a creative force. So, contrary to my family behaviors, really, there was nobody that was church going. I decided to take myself off to church when I was about 8. And for a few years, I loved it. I loved it. I joined quite an evangelical Pentecostal church, and we did lots of singing. Jesus wants me for a sunbeam, and it was lovely. And I really felt like I belonged. When I got to about 11, I got myself into trouble with the Bible school teacher. I shan't name him, but he was talking about God and reading something from the Bible. And I said, "Can I ask a question?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, if the universe is still expanding as it is, and new universes are being birthed, then that makes me feel that God would be a woman." And that went down like a lead balloon, Joe, I have to say. It was not well received.
It's a good point.
Yeah. So, and that feeling of the goddess, that was really, stimulated and reinforced by, I had this little hideaway down in the woods behind my house, and it was a hawthorn copse. And it was really interesting because I found a way that you could crawl into this hawthorn copse, and for some reason it was like a bell shape. So it was really thick on the outside, but I had a sizable space for a small boy inside. And I used to lie on the ground and put my ear to the ground, and I always felt like I could hear the heartbeat of the earth. And I used to, weird little kid, I still collect skulls and things now, but I used to scrape up dead birds and things and give them a good funeral down there and things like that. So that was my place, and that was my connection to nature, and it was big. So that was my first real feeling that here in the hawthorn tree, I was safe. And I know now with my work through the Elm and I'm working with trees like I do, that the hawthorn is about the heart, a connection of the heart and love. And I felt that there. I felt valued in that space by the natural world. And anyway, life changes. You get into your teens. My father went into the pub trade. I started to drink. My father was unfortunately an alcoholic. Lovely man, but that's why he went into the pub trade, so he could drink a lot. And unfortunately, it took his life. He died quite young. But I got involved with alcohol, other substances, and that really ran my life. That became my higher power for several years and more. And then I had a period where I started to take hallucinogens, psilocybin and other, acid and things like that, because there was still always that longing inside to connect, to have something I believed in, and and the alcohol, the drugs, it was almost like a false prophet, took you so far, and then it all crumbled. And anyway, I had an illness, and when I was 21, I ended up on a life support machine in the Bristol Royal Infirmary. And I was diagnosed with heart failure. I had fluid around the heart. I had holes in my heart valves, and technically, I was dying. And I was in there for several months on antibiotic drips trying to get rid of this infection. And the original source of the infection was having my wisdom teeth removed. Mm. And so that was just bad luck. And anyway, in the end, they told me that they had to operate. I was going to die if they didn't, even though I was what they considered to be too weak really to operate. And I overheard the surgeon talking to my father outside, and my dad was quite demanding, and he said, "What are his chances of coming through this operation?" And the surgeon said, "You really don't want to know." And my dad said, "Yes, of course I do." And he said, "Less than 20%, probably 15%. Now, I was 20 at the time.
Yeah.
And that was a profound thing to overhear. And I was just stunned, thinking it can't be over now. But by chance, or not by chance, because I don't believe in coincidences, I was reading a book on First World War poetry alongside of Lord of the Rings, as we do. And I had this thought that popped in, and I do think these are gifts from the gods. And I evaluated in those moments that all the people, all the poems that were in this book were written by people that had died 20-something or younger.
Yeah.
And I just thought, is there an evaluation that is taking place by the universe, whether we live for 5 years, 10 years, in my case, 20, 21 years, or 80 years? And I had this strong sense that it didn't really matter as long as you lived your experience. And I had this profound sense of peace that came over me. And I really didn't worry after that. Anyway, the operation took place a couple of days later. And the next thing I knew, after they gave me the medication and took me down, of course, you drift off. And open heart surgery is quite a complex process. And it was very complex in those days, because they cut your sternum, open your chest, and technically you're dead, because they get your heart out, work on your heart, and it's a big process. And so you're kept, your brain is kept going by a dialysis machine, pumping blood to the heart, from pumping blood around the brain. And all of a sudden I realized that I wasn't attached to my body. I was up in the ceiling of this room, observing what was going on. And I can remember being mildly amused that the surgeons were talking about the recent test match. And a little thought came to me. They should be concentrating on what they're doing. They're talking about cricket. Yeah. And I don't even like cricket. So I was watching this. And then I wanted to see what I looked like with my eyes closed. It was a funny thought. But I couldn't, because they had my face covered over with a towel. And then I thought, well, what is this? What's going on? And I was aware that there was this silver glow between me and my body on the table. And it was connected to the solar plexus.
Right.
And I thought, if that snaps, if that's severed, I'm dead. And then I just had this feeling of settling into what I was, where I was. And I didn't have a body, I was a consciousness. And I suddenly felt this most incredible sense of peace and connectedness, not just to this earth, but to the whole universe.
Mm.
And it felt like if I willed it, I could just be anywhere. And it was an amazing experience. And bearing in mind, I'd had a reasonably troubled teenage.
Mm.
I didn't want to come back. And so I'm thinking, right, that's it then. I'm gonna have this experience. I'm off. And I'm making this very short, obviously, but there was a whole experience because the operation was 11 hours. So, and I was able subsequently to relay the conversations that the surgeons were having back to them, which should be an impossibility.
Oh, amazing!
And one of the surgical team was really interested in that, and he was actually writing a paper about out-of-body experiences, OBEs, and so he took all the details down and said, "Can I use this in my report?" And I said, "Yeah, of course you can." But I'm thinking I don't want to come back. Being a human being is really difficult, and I've had enough of it. Mm. And then it was just this sense of warmth, and this voice came outside of me, inside of me, and it just said, "Adrian, you have to go back. You have things still to do." And I'm like, "No, don't send me back. I don't want to go back." And it was, "You have things to do. It'll all be all right. Go back." And at the time, I looked down, and the surgeons had thought they'd lost me. They'd stitched me back up. They'd replaced my heart valves. Well, they'd repaired one, replaced the other with a metal valve, and they were doing their best to get me back to life. Mm-hmm. And they were panicking a little bit because they thought they'd lost me. And then all of a sudden, I was back in my body. And the next thing I remember was I woke up, obviously in intensive care, and had to deal with the physical trauma of the heart operation. To cut a long story short, from there, over the next few years, that was the real start of my spiritual questing.
Yeah.
Because pre-internet days, of all things, and I found out that there was a near-death experience society, but believe it or not, Joe, you had to write to them.
Okay.
It was all done by post.
Yeah.
And they had a little newsletter that they used to send out, and sometimes we'd talk on the phone with different people. But that was it, because they were spread all over the country.
Yeah.
But it was really interesting sharing experiences with other people that had that out body, and quite a few of them not wanting to come back, really, in a sense, but having to, because the journey still needed to unfold. And so I went off questing. I went back to the church, and I'm very eclectic in how I view a spiritual journey for people, and you can take the best of all of them and create your own if that suits you. Mm-hmm. But I did find some of the evangelists that I came across quite discriminatory, and I think quite small and tight in their outlook. I actually heard a guy one day saying, "Well, first of all the Catholics are going to hell." And then it was, "and following them, it's all the Muslims and Sikhs." And he went down this list. So I'm sat there thinking, do you know what? They're all going to hell. And I had a friend of mine who was a Hindu at school, and I can remember going to his house, and his parents had a statue of Ganesh in their porch.
Yeah.
And they always had an incense stick going. And when you went in, they had an alcove with Shiva in. And I can remember being absolutely fascinated. Mm. And these people were kind and beautiful. And I thought, what's this bloke talking about? They're all going to that. And then he started to list everybody in the pub trade going to hell. And that was all my family, my dad, my uncles, grandfather, everybody was in the pub trade. And I thought, well, do you know what? I've had enough of this. So I actually got up and left. And that's fine. You know, I know that's not an overview of all churches, but that was my experience.
Yeah.
So then I joined a Buddhist group and chanted for a couple of years. And then I joined a Native American style group that practiced shamanistic practice and sweat lodges and lovely stuff. And it was all very lovely. But all the while, there was a little feeling in me. And the same with the Christianity. You know, I wanted something that was rooted in the soil of this land, not from somewhere far away. And I felt that there was something missing in my life. And so life went on. I ended up being caught up in life's process. I got married, had a couple of kids, and I ended up in the retail trade, which was quite demanding. I worked long hours, and I had to put all that to one side and just focus on looking after my family. But I never stopped longing to try and find a connection. And I used to find my connection. I'd go out into nature and sit with the trees, and that worked for me. Then, lo and behold, I had a memory of seeing druids at Stonehenge on the news when I was a kid. And I thought, I wonder if they're still about. Because, you know, if you don't know, you don't know. And I hadn't seen them. And there was a place down in Bristol called the Druid Friendly Society. So I went down there and knocked on the door and asked the lady if she could point me in the direction of some druids. And she laughed and said, darling, we're a charity, we're a fundraiser, we're like the Round Table. She said years ago they did druidy type stuff, but they haven't done that for years. And so we had a laugh about it. She was lovely, and I went on my way. Sometime later, one of my customers, who I used to talk to about esoteric ideology and the stars and the meanings and so on, she was lovely. She brought me in a predictions magazine. Now, being that I'm a bit dyslexic, I probably wouldn't have read all of it because it was quite complex and lots of quite interesting but deep and meaningful stuff that I didn't have the foundations of, really. So I walked to my office, and as I walked to my office, somebody came in to see me, and I threw this little magazine on the table and went to talk to the client. And when I came back, it was open, and there was a tiny little advert, and I honed in on it, and it said, are you interested in a revival of Druidic practice? If so, contact P.O. Box 133, Lewes, East Sussex. And I can still remember that because, sometimes you have a moment where you just think, my life's never going to be the same again.
Yeah.
And I wrote off to them immediately. And a couple of weeks, 2 weeks later, the first lessons came through the door. And one of those, when I opened the lesson on one of the first pages, it said, if at any time your guides, guardians, angels, or your stars decree that this is not your path, then you are welcome to leave with our love and our blessings. And I thought, how beautiful is that? And that was the beginning of my Druidic journey. And incredible. I feel quite emotional thinking about it because for me, everything changed in that moment. And I felt like I'd come home to something that was really relevant for me.
Yeah.
And it expanded, enormously from there in. But that was the very beginning.
Healing has helped me many times in my life when I'd reached a point where something needed to change. In 2005, I trained with Martin Brofman to learn the body mirror system of healing, which was life-changing for me. It's based on the idea that the parts of your body that don't work well reflect the parts of your life that don't work well, and about which you have tension in your consciousness. The understanding is that tension is stress, and stress causes symptoms. In a distance healing or in-person session, I move up the chakras, returning each one to wholeness using a colour map. During the process, I see images and situations, I hear words or receive impressions that tell me something about what caused the tension in that person's life. The feedback at the end of the session is a really big part of the healing. If you're interested in a chakra healing session, you can contact me at scarletofthefae@gmail.com.
That is absolutely beautiful, Adrian. What year was that you discovered
That would
Obod?
have been 1994.
Blimey. And you said that in the beginning, was there about 200 people, did you say?
Yeah. When I joined, very few people.
It's just fascinating, and my heart goes out to you, thinking of you as both as this little child who feels this is all a bit strange, isn't it? What's going on on Earth? This is all a bit weird, and I mean, I can relate to that. I know lots of people that listen and watch this podcast can also relate to that feeling as being a little person, and it all seeming a bit strange. And I think a lot of people even now must, thinking of children now, they must feel like that too, particularly at the moment in this sort of crazy time we're living through. So, I'm thinking about this sort of tentativeness of being here and wondering, should I be here? And then what happened then when you're 20 going on 21, where you actually do have the opportunity to leave,
Mm-hmm.
that it feels right to stay,
Yeah,
and
it felt, Joe, as though I didn't have a choice, because whatever that force was that spoke to me, I don't feel that I was in a position to refuse. It was so loving and tender and beautiful. I just knew that what it was saying to me was the truth. Does that make sense? Yeah.
It absolutely makes sense. And when you came back and you kind of woke after the op and you started to live your life again, what was that like? Did you immediately feel like a shift had taken place? Because some people talk about having gone through a situation like that, and it's really like stepping into a new life again. Did it feel like that immediately, or was it a kind of slow burner?
Absolutely. And it was both an incredible blessing and a terrible challenge, a terrible ordeal in some ways, because I had to go back. My parents had to look after me for some time. I was very ill still, and my recovery was slow. And so I moved back with my parents in their pub, and nobody else had changed except for me.
Yeah.
And it was like everybody was doing what they always did. And yet it was a bit like my senses had all been stimulated.
Yes.
Everything, the colours were beautiful. When I closed my eyes, I also did transcendental meditation around that time. But when I meditated, I felt glimpses of that connection again to everything, the allness. And but nobody else did. And I had the same social circle, the same friends. we'd grown up through school together. Everybody was still in their early 20s, going to gigs, going to see bands, drinking a lot, smoking a lot, taking drugs. And it did feel very, very strange. And I ended up going to a spiritualist church on one of my quests. And that was a very interesting experience, because I'd never been there before, and I looked like anybody else, except for I was quite young. I suppose I was about 23 by then. And during the process, the lady that came onto the stage started to gasp for breath, and she was clutching her chest and looking at me. And to be honest, I was like, oh my God, what is going on here? And the lady in front said, you've got to tell her your name, love. And I said, well, I'm Adrian. And she said, oh, thank God for that, I can let it go. She said, my dear boy, what has happened to you? It felt like my chest was being ripped apart. And of course, mine had been. Now, how she could have known that, Joe, is just, And she went on to tell me some things. She told me she'd played a part in healing me, and I said, well, I've never been here before. She told me I had a relative that was stood behind me wearing a naval uniform, that had died serving his country in the war, and would I take that? And I said, well, I've got no recollection of that. And she also told me that I was facing some serious decisions. And if I made the wrong ones, it could send me off into the wilderness for several more years. And she was right on all three things, because I found out subsequently through my grandmother, my mum didn't even know, but my grandmother was 15 years older. Her parents, she'd moved away. My nan had her own life, and she'd gone off to work in service and had a whole drama around that. But her parents, no contraception, her parents ended up having another child quite late on in life, and they couldn't bring it up. They just couldn't afford to bring it up. And they gave this little boy called Stanley Harvey to relatives who were childless, who lived in Hull. And I was able to subsequently find out that his name is on the war memorial in Hull, Stanley Harvey, because he was torpedoed on a Royal Naval vessel in the East during the war with Japan. And I had no knowledge of that whatsoever, and yet even the uniform this woman described fitted his grade, his rank in the Royal Navy.
And she could see him. She could see him supporting you. Yeah.
And I don't have any answers for that. What an amazing thing. And this lady who said she'd had something to do with healing me, I found out again that my friend who told me about this spiritualist church that his mum used to go to, his mum, unbeknown to Nigel, put my name in the healing book, because I knew her, of course. She was my best friend, one of my best friends. And she was so worried about me going into this heart operation, she put my name in the healing book. And it was the very time that this lady had come up from Plymouth, took the service, and read my name out. There was only one name in the healing book that night. So all these people that I didn't know, I had no idea of who they were, sat there and prayed for my well-being. So she had something to do with me and my healing. And I just find that so reassuring about the levels and the layers of magic. And, that beauty and the human capability for healing each other. It just opens up so many doors. And it brings a smile to my face whenever I think about it, because I was determined that this lady was wrong on all counts. And she also told me afterwards that I'd come back for a purpose, and that purpose was to heal and support others.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm 24 now, something like that. And she said, don't get drawn back into, the other world of, physical gratification.
Mm-hmm.
And, really, she was telling me not to drink and take drugs.
Mm.
And unfortunately, that feeling of being different from everybody and me not being able to manage it, I did start to drink again at some point, and I lost that sense of specialness once I started to drink alcohol and smoke cannabis again.
Right. Yeah.
And it was almost like the gift was contingent on me staying true.
Mm.
And I lost it. And for several years, life progressed, but I didn't. And emotionally, I stayed quite stuck. And then in my early 30s, through prompting again from the universe, I had to make some significant changes. So I stepped out of that world, stopped drinking, stopped taking drugs, and then rekindled my spiritual quest. And then as I started to put some effort and energy into me and my well-being and how I could impact the world in a more productive and more beneficial way by being just me and not needing any external stimulus, that was when the gift of that magazine came into my life and took me into Druidry.
Yeah.
And that was a doorway into a magical world for which I'm very grateful. I've been able to live the second half of my life, the last 33 years of my life. So, yeah, I feel very blessed by that.
I mean, it's such a big part of your life, Adrian, because you not only are you a druid, and obviously you've moved up through, being a bard. If people don't know much about Obod, you join and you potentially get invited then to sort of join and train as a bard. And then once you've gone through that section of learning, do you want to just describe actually the different levels for people so that
certainly, the bardic grade in Druidry is very much about connecting with the elements, the basic formulations of ritual, and a connection with story, mythology, and an introduction into the magic, really, on a very exciting and understandable level. And I when I worked through those lessons, I worked through them with a friend, and each lesson was an adventure. And we would try and live that lesson for a week or 2 weeks, and then we'd sit down and we'd see if we were ready to move on to the next lesson, which was lovely.
That's great.
And that took me off on many a spiritual quest, because one time we ended up in a place, investigating standing stones and dolmens and burial chambers and all kinds of things, and we ended up in a place called Tinken's Wood outside of Cardiff, and I was sat on this capstone, and the capstone, I found out afterwards, a guy did an analysis, and it's just packed with different crystals, so it actually has a healing effect on the body. And local people have gone there for hundreds, if not thousands of years, to lie on the stone if they had trouble conceiving, pregnancy, toothache, arthritis, a whole variety of ailments. And they would have gone there in faith, not knowing that they were actually involved in crystal healing.
Yeah.
So, I sat on this stone and meditated. And I don't get these, they're not an everyday experience, but I had an experience where I was meditating, I had my eyes closed, and I heard this, and didn't open my eyes immediately, and I thought, is this part of the meditation? And I can actually hear a lot of people marching by. And I opened my eyes, and for a brief moment, I saw this whole line of Roman soldiers being led by, several, officers on horses with their plumes, and they were just marching past. And I thought, my first thought was, am I in the middle of a film set? Have I missed something here? And I closed my eyes and opened my eyes again, they were gone. I found out afterwards, I didn't know, but that was the main Roman road going to Caerleon, which was a big Roman fort with an amphitheatre and a big garrison. So at some point in time, those legionnaires would have marched past this stone. And I don't know why that happened. I just accepted, because of all these amazing gifts that if you're open to them, the universe will bestow upon you, synchronicities and gifts of strange portents, and it just, once you step into the world of magic and you accept, then it just keeps coming in different ways, and you just think, wow, that was a gift. That was that was beautiful. And I also had another experience there where I found my power animal in some bushes just by the side. I felt called to go in. It was a blackthorn in hawthorn copse. And I found a little way in, and I thought, I don't know why I'm in it, but I'm in here. And this little wren landed in front of me.
Oh, right.
And it's literally about 12 inches, a little bit more, and it felt, my initial thought was, I'm close to his nest and it's trying to ward me off. But it wasn't. It was like it was talking to me and singing to me. And then I was aware out of the periphery of my eyes, that my peripheral vision, that there was a wren there and a wren there. And I thought, oh my God, this is a gift. If I look behind me and there's a wren behind me, I've got a wren in all four directions. So I looked behind and there was one behind me, and it was just like, wow. And I was trying desperately. I was like frozen in this magical moment. And then, of course, I moved and breathed, and it was gone. But, you take a little moment like that, you put it in your heart and keep it forever. And that led me to a whole journey with the wrens, where I found out how the wrens, an old Celtic story about how the wren became the king of the birds. And the wrens are very significant to druids. And so my druid name is Druien. So when I got to the druid grade, I chose my druid name, and Druien the wren, Celtic for the wren. So.
Oh, that is really beautiful. I didn't know that. It's really lovely to learn that.
I've got wrens in my garden. Everywhere I go, if something's going on for me, they just appear.
Oh,
just a little wonderful, reassuring presence.
Beautiful. Isn't it the wren that is able to climb sort of higher places than most birds? Is that the wren?
That was the legend. What the wren uses is intelligence and a word called guile. And what actually happened was there was anarchy in the world of the birds, and they decided they needed somebody to take overall charge and boss them about. So they decided to have a competition. Whoever flew the highest would be the king of the birds. So they've all set off, and at various levels, the swifts and the swallows, I can't go any further, and the rooks and the ravens, well, we can't go any further, and it gradually they all started to stop, and the hawks and the red kites, and then finally the eagle's gone as far as he could possibly go, and he's looked down on all the rest of them and said, hey guys, I'm the king of the birds. And the little wren then popped out of his feathers and fluttered a couple of feet higher and said, "No, I'm the king of the birds." So
Yeah.
it's using that intelligence, and I think for me is the message in that is you don't have to be big and physically powerful.
Yeah.
Using your intelligence, your intellect, and cunning. Cunning was another word that was really popular in those days and had pretty good, connotations to it now. Cunning, people sometimes think it means being shifty or devious, but our healers were called cunning men.
Exactly.
It was like the knowledge. So
yeah, that's it. Cunning folk. Yeah, this is exactly it. And do you know, Ade, what your ancestry is? Because I'm just thinking about the way, as a child, you're finding these spaces in the hawthorn tree, and you just feel so deeply connected with nature from the word go. I'm just wondering what your ancestry is. Interested in that.
Well, my ancestry, we had a conversation before about DNA and looking at the DNA of us as individuals is quite an interesting thing to do.
Yeah.
But it gives you a kind of a quite broad, nefarious ideology of what, different tribal systems that came into play, or different continents, etc., etc.
Yeah.
My ancestry were, interestingly enough, if we go back, were both sailors for a long period of time, so they were connected to the sea, and they originated in Honiton in Devon, and it seems like they were split between being farmers or sailors. And so, either way, they were very connected to the elements.
Yeah.
So, and my DNA structure was, 15% Old Welsh, 15% Scandinavian,
Yeah.
20% Irish, and 36% Southern European.
Yeah.
So, a strange old mix.
I'd just love to know, just because you're there and having these experiences in Wales as well. I just wanted to check that, because it does feel like you have these very deep connections to tradition, and you're able to share that through your celebrancy that you do, and of course you do counselling, but through it all, this sense to this deep sort of closeness to the other world, from being a child, from going, almost leaving this earthly realm and going elsewhere, and knowing that there's more, this kind of longing, that sense of kind of the searching and the longing. At what point so some years ago you had told me about this encounter that you'd had with Gwyn ap Neath, and for those that don't know too much about Gwyn, he is said to be the king of the fairies. He is said to dwell at Glastonbury Tor, also the Black Mountains in Wales, and a couple of other places in Wales too. And he is not only the king of the fairies, but lord of the other world, the underworld, known as either Annwn or Anufan, depending on the kind of spelling and the word that you use for that. The more ancient term is Anufan. So, it feels to me kind of no wonder that you crossed paths with Gwyn. Could you tell us a little about how that came about, and when that would have been in this journey that you've just described?
I certainly will. It was early on in my druidic journey. Within the first few years, I joined a grove in Bristol and met some beautiful people. Interestingly enough, we turned up, and it'll be 30 years, I think, this year, when both myself, J.J. Howell, and Ronald Hutton all turned up to what was then the Silurian Grove, because it came over from Wales, because it folded in Wales, and the Silurians were Welsh tribal people that actually Gwyn ap Neath was attached to.
Oh, really?
And they came across raiding, and the reason Gwyn ended up being associated with Glastonbury Tor was because large swathes of what was marshland and so on and so forth in those days with the Tor came under Silurian control. So when they came over, they brought their gods. But we all turned up for the first time to our very first grove. Prior to that, I'd been working on my own for a period of time. I didn't know there were other Druids in Bristol. So when I found out, I phoned a lady up and she said, yeah, come along. So we all went for the first time, and we're all still involved. We all love our journey. And I was out with JJ today. We went to Glastonbury. We wrote some ceremonies that we're going to be doing and workshops in Germany in a few weeks' time.
Cool.
And who would ever have thought in those early days that we'd be traveling Europe doing various workshops with other Druids and like-minded souls, and just wonderful. So early days, I've turned up for a Samhain ceremony, and
yes,
this was in Hanham, and as I come through the door, Ronald was there, Julie Britton was there, and she was a massive part of my early Druidry. It was her house that we held the ceremonies in. She had a little stone circle in the garden, and we used to have to walk through a pergola of grapes, and it just felt like when you got into this pathway, you did step from one world into another world.
Yeah.
And so they said to me, right, you're Gwyn ap Neath and you're going to be in the north. And I was like, oh, okay, who's Gwyn? And what am I supposed to be doing? And I was anxious because, I was still relatively new, and I felt the weight of responsibility of performing in a public ceremony.
Yeah.
So Ronald said, you'll be fine. Here's some information. He told me about Gwyn originally came from the Mountain of Dreams outside of Swansea and been brought over to Glastonbury, and everything you've said, the Lord of the Underworld, everybody dressed in red and purple, and the basics that go with the mythology of Gwyn. And so I did the ceremony, and I just said a few things which we were told about before. Fair enough, there was only about 12 of us in those days, so it was a small little ceremony, and although I was nervous, it was fine. I booked up to go to my first Druid camp, and that was a Samhain camp, and that was a week later. And so off I'd gone with my sleeping bag to meet all these lovely new people. And I got there, and I was instructed by somebody who said, oh, you were Gwyn ap Neath the other day in that ceremony, weren't you? And I said, yeah, okay. Well, you're going to be Gwyn ap Neath now in the ceremony tonight. And there were 60 plus people there. And bearing in mind, I was always quite shy in those days, and still quite challenged by anything to do with public speaking or anything. And I got more and more nervous as the time went on. And it was a full moon, and I decided, I think the ceremony was scheduled for about 8:30, something like that. Well, the terrain where we had this camp was that it was a big field leading down to a fairly sizable river that ran through the land. Eventually, we were blessed with being able to plant hundreds of trees all the way along that river, which was a great joy to give something back to that land, because we had so many profound and mystical experiences, all of us, at the different camps. So they were something very, very powerful experience, something very otherworldly, really. Anyway, I'm getting more and more anxious. I'm thinking of running off and jumping in my car and driving off. I don't know if I can handle it. And I decided to go down by the river and get my head together and do some prayer and meditation. And as the moon was rising, I thought, right, let's go and do it. But to get to where I wanted to be on this little peninsula, I had to walk all the way around this bog. And it was a treacherous bog. You could see, the remnants of many of its victims who had lost their Wellington boots that were sticking out of the bog. And it was probably about 60 feet wide and about a couple of 100 feet long, at least. And so it was quite a walk to go down to the end of the field and then to come back up along the solid ground by the side of the river. Anyway, I reached the peninsula and I thought, I've got to get myself together. And I looked up at the moon and I thought, I'm going to invoke Gwyn. So I just did what we do. And I just stood there and I looked at the moon and I said, look, Gwyn, I don't really know that much about you. And from what I've read, nobody knows that much about you. It's fragments of information that have come together. But I do believe that you're an energetic being, a deity of the past. And I'm calling on you now to give me the strength to do due process and honor to you in this ceremony tonight in front of all these people. Mm. And, I felt myself there just, if you will support me in this, you will be my number one, deity, and I will give back to you what I can during my lifetime to come. Mm. And, you can't make these things up, because even now, it sounds so bizarre, but it was so real and so powerful. And I had a big staff. I have still got a big staff. I've got lots of staffs, and I carved them. So, and I had this staff. It was taller than me, so it was about 6 foot tall. And all of a sudden, I had the urge to just throw this staff up in the air, which I did. And then it came down and I caught it. So I turned into some kind of majorette or something, and I'm throwing this staff around. And then I started to laugh uncontrollably and dance all on my own. I was dancing under the full moon and I was singing, and there was joy just bubbling through me. It was the most profound and just wonderful feeling of just energy just flowing through me. And then I heard the horn. Ooh. And I thought, oh my God, they were calling for the ceremony to start. Oh. And I'm a 15-minute walk away from where the ceremony was supposed to take place. And I thought, oh, I'm going to be late. But then all of a sudden, that just went. And I found myself crossing over the bog, and I've come up to where the tent was, where people were pouring in for the ceremony to start. And I was on dry land, and I looked back, and I thought, I've crossed that bog. And my feet were not in any way wet. There was no mud on my boots, and I'd crossed over a treacherous 60 feet wide bog area in about 30 seconds flat. And it was like, I had that sense that I just floated over the top of it. Mm. And there was another little bit of a drama, and it is interesting. I'm sure some people would find it scary, but it was never a scary experience for me. just a great blessing and a gift, because for some reason something had gone on, and I won't go into the details, but they were going to call off the ceremony or make it smaller, which would have taken the part of the various deity directions out. And a lady said to me, we're going to do this because of this, this and this. Apparently, and I have little or no recollection of this really, I looked at her and I said, the ceremony will take place, and it will take place in the original form because it's meant to be. And this lady said, okay. She said she took one look at me, and she knew that it had to take place as it was originally designated to do.
Yeah.
And another lady that was there said, Aid, when we looked at you, your eyes had changed completely.
Wow.
And you had no whites of your eyes.
Oh, my goodness.
She said you spoke with such power that nobody in the world would have refused you at that time. And so the ritual took place, and how can I explain it? Of course, being a human being and having an ego, one would want to revisit that experience and try and tap into that. But I quite quickly learned that it was a gift, it was a momentary gift, and that there was a purpose behind that. And what that purpose was known to the gods and not to me. And I had to go through with that. Everybody had to do what they did that night. And it was a very beautiful ceremony and really honouring for the ancestors. And people still talk about it as being one of the most remarkable ceremonies they'd ever been to. And they felt all the ancestors present, really present.
Yeah.
And I have traces of that connection that have stayed within me forever. And I still feel that from time to time. Not to that degree that I have to float around, or I've never managed to have that kind of profound experience again. But certainly during my, a very difficult period before my last open heart surgery, because I've had several operations on my heart in various ways, but the last big open heart surgery, which took place 10 years ago, again, I was really aware, deeply aware, that I was being looked after and carried through this. And that, that connection to deities, whether they be thought forms or, whether they're energy beings or, whether they're, whatever they are, they're there. And if you're open to connect with them and you allow your heart to open and to allow that connection with something greater and bigger than yourself, incredible things can come to pass. And I'm still here against all the odds, and they told me I'd be dead by the time I was 30, not to take out a pension, don't plan it, don't plan for old age. And I'm still here. And, you said I'm a counsellor. I've been able to spend nearly 30 years working in the field of addiction.
Yeah.
And I have a counselling practice, which, being self-employed, and I don't particularly, I'm retired now, but, I would talk a lot about magic and the absence of magic, and addiction being the false god and the false path. And that, by freeing ourselves up from that, there's all kinds of incredible experiences waiting through the next door. And as you open one door, there's another 3 doors that you can open, and great gifts can be bestowed upon you. And as mad as it sounds, a lot of people have got well, and I'm still in touch with a lot of people I've worked with over the years. I didn't phrase it quite like that, and I didn't tell them about Gwyn ap Neath because it probably would have frightened them to death. But just talking about vibrating on a higher level and being able to really connect with your heart.
Yeah.
And, just little bits of information. The heart sends more messages to the brain than the brain sends to the heart. So we're very heart-centered creatures. And contrary to how we behave, love is the way. Love is the law. And the more you can open your heart to loving and giving and serving, the more the universe seems to give back to, certainly in my case, it's given back to me. I can only speak about me. And, in service, I've been OBOD's press liaison officer for 20 years.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's been a great privilege to be able to do that and to direct various press organizations, newspapers, TV companies to the right people for interviews and for films and other things. And also for many years prior to that, I was a tutor in OBOD. So being able to serve as a tutor and share other people's journeys through this magical path that, just for today, and I always use that, making that decision each day that, you're either going to have a good day or a bad day, or a day where you accept that it can be a mixture of both and that you just flow with that day and you don't label it. Because life teaches us lots of lessons. Some of them we don't want to learn, or we feel we don't want to learn on an intellectual level, but on a soul level, maybe we do. Maybe that's what we're here to do, is to learn and grow and connect and accept, that being a human's not easy. So sorry, I went off.
No, thank you so much. It's really important to hear this, and I'm thinking about the way that Gwyn, as this, as you say, God or spirit or deity or Lord, it sounded that night you kind of dedicated yourself to him, standing in the moonlight on this peninsula, ready, named as him for that evening for this ceremony. Are you fully opened to that experience and dedicated yourself to him? Do you feel that's true to say in that moment?
Yeah, it's true to say.
Yeah.
And a lot of these experiences, like my heart operation and dying, you come out of that, you're never quite the same again.
No. Yeah.
My experience with Gwyn and other ceremonies and rituals I've been in, not quite as profound, but you come out of it and you're never the same again.
No.
You grow.
You do, yeah.
You develop and I can say I've got no fear of dying. I have no fear of death whatsoever because, my own experience has shown me that there's definitely, this is just a staging post.
Sure.
And it's part of our journey of discarding the body, and then we live on in this conscious spiritual realm that, I know exists because I've been there. And that's, it's easy for me to say, but, I think we all have a fear of how we get there to that point. Nobody wants to go through pain, but, in some ways, there's a part of me that's always almost looking forward to, shedding the cumbersome aspects of being human and embracing the lightness of the spirit. And as you know, I've got all the butterflies from my childhood tattooed all the way up here, and they go over. And for me, that's indicative of, that flying free and, that beautiful process of, munching around as a caterpillar and then going into meltdown in the chrysalis pupa stage and then coming out as a beautiful winged creature and off you go. And I didn't want to, because I also am aware that, there's always the shadow, and we've been conditioned to be frightened of the dark and the night and the creatures of the night, and moths are as beautiful and as relevant, and the creatures of the night and the dark and the moon. And I'm a Wiccan as well, so I practice a lot of moon rituals and worship, and I love that. Last night I was at Stanton Drew, drumming and singing under the full moon, and it was just delightful. And to be honest, there was that part of me physically was thinking, oh, the moon's not going to come up till 10:30, and I've had a really busy day, and it'd be really easy to stay in and read a book. But I know that's nonsense. That's just the chattering mind, and I put that to one side. No, I'm going to Stanton Drew. Mm-hmm. And several of us went out, and we had the most beautiful little ceremony out there. And we sang some songs, and we called in the ancestors to join in our celebration. And it felt incredible. And what was really lovely was my grandson came and joined us.
Oh, fantastic.
That was just lovely. And he loves the pagan ways and the pagan path. And, he's going to be a proper little wise man. He's had his own journey. He had cerebral palsy. Well, he's got cerebral palsy. And, was very premature at birth. And as you know, we had to raise a lot of money to get his operation, to have his spine severed and new nerves connected so that his feet could untangle, because they were permanently under, and would have stayed that way. He would have been in a wheelchair for life. And the operation worked, and now he walks, and he's my hero. And he's such an old soul.
Yeah.
And he came over to me the other week, and he loves it here because, I live in a little temple because I choose to. And he comes over and carves Owen necklaces with me. And we sit there carving and talking. And, he came over to me and he said, Grampy, he said, I want to buy a book. And I said, oh, yeah. He said, it's called Managing Your Emotions. He said, I think I need to manage my emotions better. And I said, no, how much is that then? 20 quid. So I said, right, we'll order it. And I bought him the book. And a few days later, he said, that's a really good book, Grampy. He said, I've come off of social media. This is a 15-year-old. He said, I've closed down all my social media accounts. He said, I've set my alarm for getting up 20 minutes earlier every morning so I can meditate.
Blimey.
And I'm like, wow. I wish I did all that when I was 15. And, so he's lovely, and that brings me joy, and as you know, Joe, the seeking of a connection to the land in what is a very volatile and ever-changing time for humanity, that longing to, revisit and reconnect with, the natural places and the spirits of place, and, the naiads and the dryads and of the forests and the air and the water and the sylphs and the nymphs and the gnomes. It's singing to us. Yeah. They're calling out for us to be in love with the land again, and to lose this kind of ideology that we seem to have developed for the last 2,000 years, that, the earth's there for us to do what we want with. What nonsense. We are of the earth, and we have to go back to living in harmony with the land and the rivers and the seas, and seeing them all as special and precious, and I think it's happening. Well, I don't think, I know it's happening.
I agree.
We've only got to see that. When we started to hold our ceremonies at Stanton Drew some 20 odd years ago, when I campaigned for Stonehenge to be open to the public, and quite rightly it was. And then I turned up for a couple of years, and the energy had shifted, and it became something else, a celebration. but not necessarily of the solstice. You know, there was lots of fire juggling and drumming and people doing things, and it was wonderful. I love seeing people have fun and pleasure, but that wasn't what I wanted to do on a solstice night. You know, I was there specifically for that moment of the sun rising and to honour the gods and the ritual that goes with that. And so I thought, right, I'm going to leave everybody to their thing. And I spoke to a couple of friends and I said, you know what, I'm going to go to Stanton Drove. And there was 5 of us turned up. And we didn't have enough to do all the roles. So we're running in and out, sharing the different roles. And we had a lovely little ceremony. And then the next year, I think there was 10 of us. And then the following year, there was 20 of us. And at summer solstice this year, my friend gave up counting at 300. And, you know, that's how it is.
Yeah.
And, you know, when I started to work at Stanton Drove, I had lots of profound experiences. And there's not time to encompass all of them in a talk, you know, in an hour. But we had an Imbolc ceremony, and it was one of the first we had out there. And after winter solstice, I think it was. So we had winter solstice, then Imbolc, and the part of the ritual was to give everyone a candle. And the candle, something's fallen off the shelf, which
leapt off the shelf.
Leapt off the shelf. Anyway, so everybody had a candle, but the wind was blowing, and there were trees along the riverside, and there were trees on the other side, and all the trees are blowing. And I thought, this isn't going to work, because they had to light their one candle from the main candle, from the central candle, as we took it round. And I said, okay, everyone. I said, look, what we're going to do, light your candle is symbolic. You know, it will go out because of the wind, but you can take it home, and you can do your own little ceremony at home. And you can light it every now and again, because this is the promise of the sun returning to the land. And so as the candle holder went round, and I thought, okay, that lady's candle stayed alight, and so's that lady, and that guy's candle's still alight. And there was about 25 people there, and they went all round the circle, and everybody's candle stayed alight. And they're holding them in the palm of their hands. And I looked over, and the trees were going both sides.
Yeah.
And no wind. We were in this absolutely perfect bubble of peace. And our candles stayed alight. And, you know, everybody could see what was going on. And we were all deeply moved by the whole experience. And just as we were packing up and leaving after the end of the ceremony, a little old lady, probably in her 80s, I saw her this once, I never saw her again. And she said, young man, can I have a word with you? And my instant thought was, oh, I'm going to get a telling off for doing druidy things over here. And, you know, and I shouldn't have done. I made an assumption, and that taught me a lesson. And this little old lady came over and she said, I'd like to thank you for coming here today. I've lived in the village all my life. And she said, the stones have been waiting for you druids to come back, and now they can wake up.
Oh, yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
Fantastic, yeah.
You know, isn't that amazing?
It's true. It's an extremely powerful place, isn't it, Ade? And you know, it does light up, I feel, when we're there, and the ceremonies that you hold there are just out of this world, and they're fun and they're heartwarming, and it's always a lovely community that comes together at these, because you do the cross quarter festival, so that is the the solstices, the equinoxes, I should say, so the winter and summer solstices and the autumn and spring equinoxes, and they are great times for people to come together. And that last one, sorry, go on.
Also, just to say, we also do the 4 fire festivals. So we do Imbolc, Beltane, Lughnasadh, and Samhain, and Jim and Heather do those. But it's just lovely because the full Wheel of the Year is celebrated there now, and it's just beautiful.
That's right. So the Sun Festival, the fire festivals are usually the first of the month, and the equinoxes and solstices are usually the 21st of the
21st.
Corresponding month.
And there's always somebody that points out, actually it's 4:30 on the 22nd, but who cares? The word solstice means sun's down still. So for 3 days, we're in that zone, and it gives people a bit of continuity, and they can get it in their diary. And I'm sure the great mystery, the gods, the goddesses, are not going to be truly pissed off with us for not being minute and hour perfect.
No, exactly.
In the greatest scheme of things.
But anybody can turn up to those. I'll pop a link on the notes. And one thing you mentioned just before was about this sense of people tending to keep anything to do with shadow at arm's length, and it really strikes me that throughout your life you have met the shadow in the kind of being a child and sensing the shadow of the world and wondering if it's whether it's you that's wrong, or have you been dropped off somewhere that's a bit too strange. And the suffering that you've been through, not only your physical illness, which is that's immense what you went through, that operation as a young man, just coming into adulthood and stepping out into the world, and then just being completely devastated by this physical condition that you then had to suffer greatly physical pain, and face death in that moment, at that time, that turn, and then going back into the darkness again, but through the darkness finding that chink of light. And this is something that I've spoken to guests previously about, and it always ties in around Gwyn ap Nudd or other kind of figures, deities that you might think of, perhaps Hecate as perhaps a sort of delving further into the darkness, but finding a richness within the darkness. I mean, if you think about winter solstice itself, I'm always thinking about the way that the summer solstice is very much celebrated. It's we're usually being outside, we're usually celebrating outwardly in company. It's seen, we can see it, we can hear it, there's always lots of images about it because people can gather together at that time, and it's a very sort of public outward celebration. Winter solstice, on the other hand, it's inner. It's in the darkness. It's held. A lot of times it can be a very personal thing, because at that time of year you have naturally gone deep within yourself, and we meet some challenges in these times, but yet I've noticed myself personally over the last sort of 3 or 4 years that real sense of the power of the winter solstices has been very present. So I'm thinking about, you've got Gwyn representing this other world, the darkness, and, because he often appears as this tall, dark figure, that's the kind of perception that people have of him, of what they see him as, and these dark times. And do you think that feels kind of part and parcel, that is the gift that he can bestow? Yes, you move through the suffering, and you in dedicating yourself to him, and in a sense kind of representing an essence of him, it's very present in the work that you do, because in that darkness you're able to guide people to find the light within themselves and to emerge on the other side of that. Is that something you feel that has been quite a marked kind of recognition of that in the work that you're doing?
I do, Joe, and in a sense, it's sometimes it's quite difficult to judge yourself in your own success in that sense. But I do feel that I was given a purpose, and as that lady said when I was 21, which is a lot of years ago now, I was sent here to help and to heal and to work with others. And I thought my path initially was through aromatherapy. I trained in aromatherapy. I trained in spiritual healing with the National Federation of Spiritual Healers. I did Reiki, and I still do. All of those things are relevant, and they're very powerful, pertinent, and an aid to supporting people who are suffering. But for me, I do believe that my journey is to lead by example, in a sense, because I lived the life that I always wanted to live but never thought I could. And through the aid of Gwyn and the energies and connecting with the elemental beings and being seen and unseen and having that faith that this, what we perceive as human beings is only a tiny microcosm of the macrocosm that's going on around us all the time, and I lead by example. And, I go to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, and I haven't taken a drink. It'll be 33 years on January the 1st. And people say to me, why do you still go? And my answer to that is, why wouldn't I go? Because, my gift is not necessarily, expounding words of wisdom and, which maybe sometimes I do by sharing my own experience. We all do. You can have as much wisdom if you've only been in there one day as 33 years in that moment. But for me, I'm an example of not changing and taking that for granted and then running off. And I think in my heart, and I don't want this to sound like an ego thing, for me, my purpose has been, and why my life was given back to me, is love and service.
Yeah.
Service to humanity in whatever way I can. And it seems like the way that's been given to me is to live my life in a way that celebrates the fullness and richness of everything that the gods have bestowed upon me, despite the fact that, it's been really challenging as well. And, I've had 3 heart operations altogether. I've got a pacemaker, a defibrillator, metal heart valves, lots of other things. But, that's all okay. But, I am called, or I call on myself, or the gods support me in living my best life every day. Because, this isn't a dress rehearsal. This is it. This is what we've got. And we all have choices. How do I want to live today? And I've got this little process that I go through where in the morning when I get up and I pray to my gods, and I ask for, me to be the best version of myself so that I can help others, not so that I can necessarily help myself. And at the end of the evening before I go to bed, and I always read before I go to sleep, and then I put the book down and I turn the light off and then I do a review of my day. And then I always thank my gods for another day, another gift of life that I've been able to live fully present in whatever's going on for me. And, no life is without incident and upset and relationship dramas and, and there's plenty going on for me at the moment in my family. But, if I can just be solid, or as solid as I can be an anchor in a stormy sea. And that's, I think, that's a gift that the gods have bestowed upon me by my experience. But also, again, allowing myself to feel held by, something unique and special and divine in the universe, and fully believing in that, it comes in, and I read, there was a plaque I saw once, God is there, bidden or unbidden. And I think, if we're prepared to open our hearts and to let our love flow out, then something else flows in, and then, yeah. I don't know if any of that made sense, Joe. Sorry.
No, it's yeah, that's really, really wonderful. Thank you so much, Adrian. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for sharing your encounter and for everything that you do and everything that you've done, because you help and have helped a hell of a lot of people, probably more than you even realise. And I'm honoured to know you. Thank you, my friend. I really mean that.
You're most welcome. You did say you wanted me to tell you about trees?
Yes, I would like you to show, because you make some OM pendants by hand. Yeah. And if you can bring those up so we can have a look at those, because you also do you sell these on your website, or is it an Etsy page or something? Yeah,
I've got a little Etsy store.
Cool.
Being a poor old retired druid now, they keeps me busy. No, I'm only joking. Actually, I've been very blessed. But it fascinates me every time I get an order, and it really fills my heart with, joy in that sense that, I know people are wearing these little necklaces and connecting to the trees and the dryads of the trees and the spirits of the trees. I harvest most of my woods, as close to or on or around sacred sites as possible. And I ritually work with the trees to see if I'm able to take a tiny little branch, and usually a low-lying branch or a branch that's going over a path where it's going to be hacked off, when they, trim all the, the hedgerows and the bushes, and or sometimes there's freshly dropped branches, and I'll work with those. But it's been a fascinating journey, and I don't know how this started because I'd never carved anything before in my life, and I don't know if you can see these. These are just some examples. For example, that's hazel.
Can you bring it? Can you take it off the? I don't know if it's easy for you to take it off the peg and bring it up to the camera, because they are so beautiful. And whenever we meet, or you're listening to a talk or something like that, you'll be there. You're whittling away, aren't you?
I am whittling away, and I love it. And there's something really profound about it. You can actually connect with, the energetic dynamics. And of course, in the Ogham, it's a Celtic language. It was written down by a Christian priest in the 10th century. And there are standing stones that carry these symbols and signs. And some of it has been built on over the years. For example, that's oak. And the oak that I've got, I picked up from after a storm at Wismans Wood. So that comes, and
powerful.
And this is my favourite, which is hawthorn. And hawthorn's about the heart. I make these as well, make them slightly different. Hazel is about the intellect. It carries the story of the hazel, the 9 trees of wisdom, dropping their nuts into the sacred pool of Shagai, and the salmon of wisdom consuming the nuts and becoming the wisest of all animals. And so there's all symbology and legend behind this, but it does fill my heart with something really special when I hear the stories. 2 guys in a meeting, recovery meeting in New York.
This is AA recovery.
An
right?
AA meeting, yeah. And one guy was speaking, and he was talking about how his recovery started some years earlier, and blah blah blah. And this other guy had gone to New York on business, and he looked over and he said, "I reckon I know that necklace." So after the meeting, the guy went over and said to him, blah, 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 you got sober in this place. And he said, yeah, how did you know that? I didn't mention it. And he opened his shirt top and he had one of the same necklaces.
Oh.
And so they recognized each other through the necklaces.
Oh, Necklace Brothers.
I also make wands.
I was going to ask you about that, Aid, because we did a bit of wand whittling in the garden once, didn't we?
We did indeed.
I've still got mine. I still use mine. Do you carve staffs for people? Do you carve sticks for people?
I don't anymore. And I'll tell you why. They take so long. And,
right. Yeah.
That's
beautiful.
This is a beautiful wood to work with.
It's gorgeous. What wood is that?
This is ivy.
Is it really?
Yeah.
That's
and it's
stunning.
got its own unique curves. And I'm sending this one to Denver in Colorado.
Amazing. That's a beauty.
Yeah. So you can order them through my website, which is rooktherapy.co.uk. There's a whole section on the Owens, and it's not just about ordering them. I'm not a salesperson, and I don't. If people feel drawn to them, wonderful. If it's going to be something in their life, great. But what you can do on that site is you can learn about the qualities of the different trees, and there's a lovely little simple booklet by a lady called Glennie Kindred.
Oh, yes.
And I think that's a really lovely place to start.
Mm-hmm.
And, and then if you feel the need, it started off in the ovate grade for me, and it was suggested that we carve our own wand. And the tree of the ovate grade is yew. So I went out and I found a piece of yew and I sat carving it, and and I thought it was trial and error. And then all of a sudden, again, like with everything else, hand it over to the gods. And I just found myself whittling away, carving, just loving it. And it just went on from there. And it's almost been not obsessional, vocational to keep carving these, if that makes sense. Because every tree, I go out, I have an experience with the wood, and when I sit there carving them, it's a very peaceful, meditative process. And I put love into all of them and magic, and it's all ceremonially done. And I just love it. And, I'd make them, it was a funny thing because originally I made them, kept carving them, and I gave them all away. And I was happy to do that. But then a Druid friend of ours said, well, you should start a website. And of course, we've all got to live. And so it's a nice little way that I can mix something very spiritual and with a product that people want.
Exactly.
And I'd still carve them if they didn't want them.
Yeah. It is a beautiful gift that you've got there, Aid. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. It's been really lovely. Some of the stories you told today I hadn't heard before, so that's always wonderful to hear and learn more about you and your amazing life. Everyone keeps telling you need to write your memoirs, so you're going to have to crack on with that. I have to give you a dictaphone or something like that if you if you're too busy. And I should mention you do workshops as well.
Yeah.
So do you want to, I will link to those, but you actually kind of, through the seasons, you go into depth about certain trees, don't you, within those workshops?
I do. Normally we run them at Joe Dunbar's place, and, you can normally find them on Botanica Medica.
Yes.
Joe's a medical herbalist.
That's right.
And,
very excellent one.
And that's been an amazing experience with Joe of, really connecting to plant spirits and the energies and their medicinal qualities, really gave me a whole new level of learning and experience about the symbiotic nature of life. Why would these plants be designed in such a way that they would aid us with certain illnesses? And, it's lovely. It just reinforces that, the harmonic nature of, that vibration that goes all around the planet. And we're all here to help each other. So that's a lovely experience for anybody that wants to, to look at it. But yeah, you'll find the workshops listed on Botanica Medica. We do various trees throughout the year, and they're only small gatherings, and it's very informal but beautiful. We go out and meet the tree and do other things and herbal workshops and so on.
Brilliant.
And I, now that, I'm not so much involved in therapy, I can dedicate more time to my own journey, my own development. And I love nothing better than going out and just sitting in a wood with my back to an oak tree and just to really connect. Also, I do a celebrancy. I do quite a lot of ham fastings, which are very joyful, beautiful blessings to be able to be part of, and funerals, which is equally a celebration of somebody's life. So
absolutely
equally helpful and equally relevant and pertinent. So that's that.
In your hands, so meaningful and beautifully and open-heartedly provided, as I know from your ceremonies at Stanton Drew. So yeah, thanks so much for all you do, Ade, and yes, we shall speak soon, and I'd like to come along to one of the workshops with you and Joe. And I should mention, so Joe is a celebrated, as you say, medical herbalist, and she's published a couple of books too, I think 3 books now, definitely 2.
Yeah.
Joe is a great person to learn from too. So the two of you together make a fantastic team, and it always looks great seeing the pictures of your workshops.
Joe. And